Well, how about that? Well, all I have to say is hello, Sioux City. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of your party. Nice place you have here. I'll say I have loved this building from the first time I saw a picture of it. I think I was in grade school. And it is a place of magic. And it is something that I'm just going to share little bits and pieces of on how this building came to be, and try to maybe even give away some of its secrets if I can, if you promise to keep them with me. So we talk about the idea of modernism's messengers, and there is a figure who is hovering nicely over all of us, way over the dome somewhere, and that's Louis Sullivan, who you've heard about here. This was a visionary architect who was able to take architecture into another realm. And one way to interpret Sullivan was that every individual is a part of living nature with the ability to think, to reason, and to create. And in so doing, you can convey, as an extension of nature itself, vital life to a building and give it the same sense that you can get in experiencing a work of nature. A beautiful sunrise or the autumn leaves, that is what you are supposed to see, and that's what you will get in many of Sullivan's buildings. He was one of the people who developed the earliest skyscrapers. In the early days of the skyscrapers, architects weren't used to, how do you design a building that's, oh my gosh, it's 10 stories tall, and we only do 5-story buildings. The early ones look like little 5-story buildings stacked on top of each other. Maybe no one will notice it's tall. Sullivan said, let the buildings be tall. Another thing to keep in mind with a Sullivan building is that in fact, it's great. Thank you so much for taking care of that Prairie School thing. I'm delighted about that. And you often think of the Prairie School and you do see wonderful horizontal character and the celebration of the flat lands and the bricks and the horizontal lines. But in the case of a Sullivan building, if you look at them, and look at these here, that's the old fraternity temple that was never built in 1891, and that's the old Schlesinger and Mayer store, now reborn as a Target. They did a good job. That if you look at the building, it is an analogy to, both of them are an analogy to a living plant. They root to the ground, they rise up, and they blossom against the sky. In fact, that little sketch of Elmsley's for this building where he says, the flower at the top, that's the secret of the whole thing. And the secret of these buildings, you can know this building, you can know the parts, and you can look at it, you can identify the ornament and the colors, but the real secret of what makes you remember this building is what you feel and hear from the building. It is creating an environment that pushes your buttons the same way something in nature does. It's something you don't know that's happening. You feel it in here. It's like a great, and that is the note they did. And for Sullivan, he felt that each individual had their own powers out of their own selves, out of their own background, to be able to create a palette and create buildings and bring alive what is not alive in a way that is expressive not only for the people who see it, but reflecting the individuality of the architects who did it. Another aspect of Sullivan was ornamentation, which is actually a complete representation of this idea. A building is made out of assembled geometric modular parts, but they are given life by the architect. In this ornamentation, you have a geometric basis that is morphed with organic forms that you can't tell where one begins and the other leaves off. It acknowledges that it is a building is a assemblage of parts and of repetition, yet at the same time given life. Now, Sullivan felt that the whole message that this is an idea and that people should learn this philosophy, and it was the duty of every person that studied under him or to understand his principles to make part of themselves, their own being, their own way of expressing things, to carry this message forward. And then Sioux City decides to build a new courthouse, a representation of American democracy in the Midwest, the heart of America. What a better place to demonstrate this. And who comes as the messengers to put this together? But you could call it the all-star team coming to assemble the parts. William Steele, yay, having worked for Sullivan, learning the principles, settling right here in Sioux City, Iowa. George Grant Elmsley, Sullivan's trusted assistant for 20 years, as we have heard so eloquently about. And also another alumnus of the Sullivan office, William Gray Purcell. And then there were more as well. These are the architects who are the creators of this building. But you also have John W. Norton. Springfield, no, he was from Lockport, Illinois, another product of the prairie. He was one tough guy. And he did art directly and simply. And if you look at this in the time of the period, to have this kind of simplicity, directness, and bold color, this isn't your typical mural that you find. He's a part of the story, but we don't want to be here all night, so I'm not going to tell you any more about him for now. And let's not forget about Mr. Christian Schneider, the Norwegian-born modeler, who is the one person who had the ability to model Louis Sullivan's ornament and also the ornamentation of Steele and of Elmsley, to create ornament that makes it not decoration on a flat background, but the ornament is a part of the surface just the way the waves are to the ocean. Very few people could do it. Schneider did it. He is the person who created all of the ornamentation or supervised the modeling of all of the non-sculptural decoration in this building. But the person we're going to talk about in concentrate, because I just happen to, well, I've got his archives. I've got his papers, and so I can peek and see what he has. This is Alfonso Yanelli. Now, most of the people involved in the building were all in their 30s or their 40s. Alfonso Yanelli was this young, passionate sculptor who got the job to work on the sculpture for this building when he was 27 years old. And he has quite an interesting background. So let's go back to Andretta, Italy, and let's say about 1895. And, oh, there's Alfonso. Isn't he cute? And he went as a young boy and he apprenticed under a man who restored paintings in churches in Italy. He had the job as an assistant squeezing walnuts to make oil that they would then tint to be able to make oil paint. And he winds up coming with his family when he's 10 years old. They settle in Newark, Ohio, and it becomes evident that young Alfonso really has a good sense of art. These are some of his grade school drawings done when he was a student at Newark, and he was still in grade school when he did this. Now, at the school he was at Newark, it was mostly immigrant children in the public school. So what do they teach you about kind of Americanizing and learning about the heroes of America and the symbols? And we have so many of his old school drawings. We have little cutout hatchets of George Washington telling about the cherry tree, and things of Abraham Lincoln in his cabin, and the poems of James Whitcomb Riley, and beautiful little drawings of waving flags. So somebody of this ability, the teachers realize this is somebody special. And when he's still just a teenager, he winds up being sent to New York City to a very prestigious art school that was hard to get into, the Art Students League of New York. And so he becomes a student there and learns under some of the great artists of America. One of the people who was there teaching was George Bridgman. Bridgman is still considered one of the great authorities on the teaching of anatomy and body parts relation. And this is something that Yanelli was interested in throughout his life. If you look at the figures on the sculpture and you see those flexing muscles and whatnot, those aren't just made up. They're based on Bridgman's drawings. But another influence on him was, you talk about John Warner Norton being this tough, ornery guy. I'll show you a tough, ornery guy. And here's, oh, actually, not that, that's Alfonso at one point. And this is some of his sculpture. But here is Mr. Gutzon Borglum. And so he's taught under Gutzon Borglum. Now, Borglum felt about the idea of the American spirit, that there should be a new American art, that America should find its own artistic voice. And one of the things that he told in his teachings was, and Alfonso Iannelli remembered, the glory that was once Greece, I would throw it all in the Atlantic Ocean. Why? To give the Americans the courage to say what they have to say. Yeah! This is what he would teach. And Iannelli soon becomes his assistant. This is a statue of General Sheridan. Iannelli remembered detailing the buttons on his coat. That was one of his early things working for Borglum. But he also learned some other things besides art dealing with Borglum. It is working as a sculptor doing public work in standing up for the integrity of your work. Now, Iannelli's in New York. He's an assistant to Gutzon Borglum. And Borglum gets the job to do angels for the St. John the Divine in New York, this great cathedral. And these are some of the angels that were created by Borglum. Iannelli helped. There was somebody who was associated with the church who complained that ecclesiastically a mistake was made, that angels are not decidedly feminine, that they are more asexual, and that they should be changed. What did Borglum do about that, with this criticism? He busted them to pieces rather than compromise his work. And it got a lot of publicity in the process. Same thing that happens too when you are a sculptor doing architectural work. Typically what you do is you create a small model, and it is up to other sculptors to create the actual work. Well, that's what happened in St. John the Divine. Not only was Borglum unhappy about that thing, the comment on his angels, but he thought these people who were carving, interpreting his models were total brutes. And so, I don't know, maybe this guy right here was changing the nature of his work. And so Borglum believed that an artist really needed to take command and make it a product of their own hand. Because after all, even going by the Sullivan philosophy about an individual's power to be able to make things alive, you need to do it as directly as possible. So, here's Borglum's going to disown the cathedral sculptures. And they finally let him get up on the scaffold and fix them the way he wanted. These are lessons that Alfonso Iannelli learned. Now, he moves to California because he thought New York is about classicism. It's about other cultures. He thought being out where there were Native American and Aztec cultures would be the true heart of America. Iannelli wrote in 1913, "We have more wonderful relics left to us by the Indians and early Californians than any other nation. One Aztec design is more worthy of our reverence than all the Italians ever produced." Wow. Okay. But he is trying to find an American art. He is trying to find himself. And he even starts up a school devoted to this. This school is organized for the purpose of encouraging and developing American ideas, for which only can come from the raw American spirit, the young people, and introducing the knowledge necessary to execute these ideas in a way that students can acquire facility of expression quickly and unhampered. Signed, Alfonso Iannelli. But then he falls in love. Now, this is the part of the story of the courthouse that you don't hear about. This is Margaret Spaulding. She was an artist. She was younger than him. She grew up largely in Los Angeles. She was very taken with the idea of modernism, but she was looking at European modernism. And so she was looking at modern abstract art. Iannelli meets her, and they fall in love. She's actually is a child prodigy. Here's a picture of her when she was still in grade school. They're writing about her in the Los Angeles newspapers for her ability in art. And also, she was a sculptor. And so this is a model that she made for her high school yearbook, which was actually considered good enough that it was in the art column of the Los Angeles Times. So this is somebody of great skill. Together at the Yanelli Studios, Margaret and Alfonso collaborated and created these wonderful posters for the Orpheum Theater, which was a theater in downtown Los Angeles. The person who takes the lead for these is actually Margaret and not Alfonso. She is looking at the European modernists. Alfonso's things were very kind of abstract at this period, but the two are starting to meld together. A wedding ceremony happens just before Valentine's Day in 1915. The young Italian artist marries the young New England girl, and they become this great power couple, and they move their studio to Chicago, where they are going to specialize in commercial art, architectural decoration, product design, to bring modern architecture, or to bring modern design, not to the rarefied few who go into a museum, but if you put it into advertising, public sculpture on buildings, vital modern art will be there for everybody to see who's walking down the street, to be able to get a reaction to it. This was the way you spread modernism. And one of the early jobs, of course, Alfonso had gotten was to help Frank Lloyd Wright with the Midway Gardens in Chicago. Two strong-minded individuals there. There were some good fights on that one, but it created some iconic sculpture as well. But then Yanelli hears there's a job that is happening in a place in Sioux City, Iowa, that there's going to be a new courthouse going up. There is initially Gutzon Borglum was going to be brought in and was contacted about working on it. And probably through some ornery comments of Borglum, he didn't get the job. We don't know exactly how the contact. One is that Borglum recommended his young former assistant in Chicago, Alfonso Yanelli, to work on it. But next thing you know, Alfonso Yanelli is writing a letter to Purcell and Elmsley, soliciting for the job. He is 27 years old. Margaret is 23. And George Elmsley is taken with the work. William Steele is taken with the work. And Elmsley did not want to dictate what the art would be like. He wanted it to come out of the spirit of the sculptor. That is the whole spirit of democracy, of individuals creating. So the directions that Elmsley gave were, we want a balanced rhythm, caring for the lights and darks of human life, with empathetic and completely dominating note of hope, joy, and courageous, active optimism. That was Yanelli's charge. Now, one thing that Yanelli insisted on from the beginning is when you are creating terracotta, you normally make a small pattern, and you have the sculptors who are familiar with sculpting terracotta duplicate it. Yanelli's not going to let that happen because that's the same thing that got Borglum into trouble. So he insisted that all of the models he is going to create himself, full size. Wow. And so they get the job. And next thing you know, you have Alfonso Yanelli and Margaret Yanelli and barrels and tons of clay that now have to be made into major sculpture. And they originally figured the price was ridiculously small. I mean, it was just something like $3,000 for all of it. But the infectious idea of creating out of yourself and being inspired took hold in this project, and it did with Yanelli. So William Gray Purcell was actually one of the partners, was guiding the ideas for sculpture. The sculpture over the front entrance was going to be a single large winged figure with small few figures gathered at the bottom. Here you can see a couple of representations with it. Yanelli had other ideas and completely redesigns the whole concept. In fact, we can even give you a little idea of his process here. So here's a little sketchbook that we have, and here's a preliminary sketch for the sculpture over the main entrance. Oop. And then next to it is a clay sketch to show how it would look. No more central figure. Here you now have a central figure and 12, count them, 12 figures, larger than life size, marching across. It's going to cost a little extra money. William Steele was great at going to the board of supervisors and somehow getting a little more, although something wasn't successful. And then here you can see another study where he's just starting to work in the ornamentation for it. Now let's kind of go into some of the stories of it. There's the finished panel as you see it across the building. It would have looked nothing like that as originally designed by the architects. Now, one of the things that's interesting for all of Yanelli's interest in a modern American architecture, the figures are remarkably historically based. I believe that the idea that Yanelli was taken with, the idea of creating a building that is a shrine to democracy, is something that is sacred and respected, so actually borrows the trappings of what you would find in an ancient cathedral with flowing robes and figures, because this is what the topic actually deserves. The central figure, the original figures were what you see, this bald man. Now, law, the figure of law has to stand up to a lot of things. Law stands in the middle of controversial things. Law is challenged. Law can sometimes get a hit to the nose. And take a look at the nose of law. Then it starts to develop, and with the encouragement of William Gray Purcell, there's things back and forth where he suddenly gets kind of a beard, he gets hair that is swept back, and who is it? It's William Gray Purcell's grandfather, who was a crusading newspaper publisher, an early conservationist, somebody who Purcell had great admiration for, and who better to represent a figure of trust, integrity, and respect but his grandfather. So when you go through that entrance and look up, you can see William Cunningham Gray. There he is looking down at you. Now, the figures that are up there it's an interesting assortment of people. The individual figures, and they're larger than life size, represent different aspects of life that you would encounter and who would come under the jurisdiction of law and democracy. So then one of them is motherhood. Well, it just so happens, while Alfonso and Margaret were modeling this ornament heroically in these huge modeling sheds, Margaret was expecting her first baby, who is born in early 1917, and the figure of motherhood is Margaret and her child. In fact, this little gold-framed picture is something that they had isolated in a picture and kept as kind of a souvenir, little memento of mother and child. So there they are. And there you can see a later picture of Margaret and her son, Alfonso Jr. But you also have religion, capital, who looks a lot like Karl Marx to me, youth, art, unmarried motherhood, agriculture, war, old age, and my personal favorite, folly. She is actually shown on the earliest Yanelli sketches as coquette, but then she becomes folly. For the side entrance, there also were, in the original Purcell concept, two large angels on each side. Yanelli would have none of that and changed it to a figure representing man and woman. It's possible that that could be Margaret as well, although this was, I think, sculpted a little bit before the baby was born, so I'm not so free to be able to say that. Now, these photographs would be sent to Elmsley and Steele to critique, and Elmsley used to draw in the corners of the ornament, of the panels, his ornamentation, thinking that Yanelli should incorporate ornament to integrate the panels more to the ornamental patterns. Yanelli subjectively didn't like Elmsley's ornament, and he fought like anything. And so there's only a little token, a bit of it on the front, and he was able to hold it off on the side of these figures. But again, very different from what it was supposed to be. And then there's the eagle across the top, two of them. And the size of these, and it was written about in the Sioux City papers that these are no ordinary eagles. These are American eagles, true United States birds, according to one of the papers, and of course the buffalo on the loading dock. Now, the enthusiasm for this, the project keeps growing. Now you've got more sculptures being added. Yanelli's asking for more money. Steele has to go to the supervisors who are grumbling, but they go along. Thank you, Metz family. I think that's in helping that happen to realize this vision, because there was always, I think, Steele coming with hat in hand and saying, we've got a little more to take care of here. But there was also to be, when you walk in, if you look at the entrance here and you look at the entrance on the other side, that horizontal frieze, there were to be 2 Yanelli panels. And it was to represent the 10 commandments. And on one side, the good commandments, on the other side, the bad commandments. So here is the rendering for the panel of the good commandments. And here you can see details of it. The stars are twinkling in the sky, and people are walking hand in hand, mothers and fathers in respect and love, and mother and child. And then here's the bad commandments. Well, let's take a look at these. Well, here's some people fighting, and anguish, the tree from the Garden of Eden and whatnot. So Yanelli gets to work, and of course you do the fun stuff first, so you do the bad commandments. He makes a full-size model of the bad commandments. Here it is. And so this is what would be used to make the terracotta patterns. You'd make a mold of it. Now, there was the sketch that was approved by Steele, Purcell, Elmsley, and the supervisors. But Yanelli could kind of get carried away. So if you take a look and see at how he'd take the sketch and how he'd execute it, well, that kind of follows what was done. Yeah, that looks similar. Look at that mad embrace there. Well, okay, that's fine. Here's thou shalt not kill. Somebody ready to get belted with a rock and somebody holding him off. Well, what he drew, that looks like what was executed. This is thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. And so this man grabbing at a woman as her child clings to her leg. And then finally at the end, thou shalt not commit adultery. Okay, so here's the way thou shalt not commit adultery is proposed. So here you see a man leading along a woman. She's wearing a flowing robe, and you can see she's kind of embarrassed, and this guy is leading her along. Well, that's what was approved. That's what Elmsley and all of them were expecting. But Yanelli was a man of passion. He got carried away. How'd she come out? Whoa! I mean, now the man is just kind of like, I can't even deal with this. And she's strutting. Well, this isn't going to go. In fact, Elmsley sees it. I do not believe in have. I do not like it. I do not want to see it in execution. Word gets to the supervisors. There's word about this. Oh, my gosh. Fighting going back and forth. O.L. Brownlee, the city editor of the Sioux City Tribune, writes to Yanelli saying, some dissension seems to have arisen among the local county officials over the acceptance or rejection of certain decorations designed by you for the new Woodbury County Courthouse. The Tribune feels it would be too bad if you should be forced to sacrifice the work you have done on these panels. All right. So here is the panel as it was proposed by Yanelli and caused all the fuss. Well, there it is. In fact, it's interesting. In my personal opinion, looking at the ornament of William Steele, I think this is Steele's ornament. This looks more like Steele than Elmsley because I think it had to be fabricated fast and to replace it. So much, we even have a little piece of the rejected friezes over at the City Museum. There's the Yanelli exhibit there, which is a lot of fun to see. And you can see where the order and disorder actually would have been. So the building is completed. It is celebrated. It is written, if I look in Yanelli's files, there are foreign journals of art that illustrate the Woodbury County Courthouse. There's even the famed magazine, Harper's Bazaar, and many of the artistic direction of that was by the great artist Erte, who did great, wonderful modernist drawings. It featured a whole story about the Woodbury County, including, finally, the rejected freeze disorder gets into a national publication where at least it gets to be seen by the readers of Harper's Bazaar in 1922. And kind of to close, what happens to the people who are part of this magic all-star dream team? Well, Gutzon Borglum goes and carves Mount Rushmore. Alfonso Yanelli, his career kind of faded by the 1930s and 40s, rejecting abstract modernism and insisting on more humanist-related figures. One of his, in fact, it was very interesting, his idea of creating a great monument for the people. In fact, he dreamed of getting a sponsor, and he made things for imaginary, monument to humanity, a monument to the people of America. In the end, his biggest sculpture was for an insurance company carving the Rock of Gibraltar on the Prudential building. Oh my gosh, well, that's what happened. But the other thing is, too, depending on how updated your kitchen is, you may have Alfonso Yanelli in your own kitchen because he specialized in designing kitchen appliances, including the Sunbeam coffee maker. And if you have a blender that has that kind of top on it, you can thank Alfonso Yanelli for that design, and also for the malted milk maker. That's Alfonso as well. Now, Margaret, she is somebody who worked a lot with her hands on the sculpture, and she was to be Alfonso's partner in their practice. And if you look at the old letterhead, it's the Yanelli Studios, and her name was first, M. Yanelli and I. Yanelli. At the time of the courthouse and beyond, she started to be able to, that she couldn't concentrate on her work. Sometimes she would get frustrated and she would destroy work that she created, tearing things to pieces. It was the onset of mental illness that was soon to overtake her. She spent more than half of her life institutionalized, and here she is at a sanitarium with sketchpad in hand in 1923. She kept creating vital art, including creating multicolored mimeograph newsletters for the hospital that are absolute beautiful works of art. Alfonso dies in 1965, hardly rated an obit in the Chicago papers. Margaret outlived everybody who cared about her. Her body was not claimed and dumped in an unmarked grave. Now, I'm not going to leave it on a bummer like that. But these were passionate people who gave out of themselves and their own spirit to give tangible form to something to stir everyone's senses, knowing how human reactions work to push your buttons, changes in space, color, how you experience this building as you move through it. This building is as much about the intangibles as it is about the tangibles, the same as experiencing something in nature. You don't find that in architecture very often. And all I can say now is, nice place you got here. And thank you to the people of this area for building this building years ago. Thank you to the people who care for it today. Happy 100th birthday to every one of you. You deserve the most wonderful 100th birthday ever, and you'll always have it right here with you. Thank you.